So much to unpack here. So let's bring back the front bench. Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, Gurdaton Singh, and Rachel Aiello. Sabrina, let's start with you. If you had to grade President Biden in that speech, what letter would you give him?
B plus. I think that he did what he needed to do. Do I think he delivered the best speech of his life? No. But I think it's really interesting that the Republicans continue to talk about this being such a political speech, being the most political speech ever. Like the State of the Union generally has been a political speech, and this is a campaign year, so I would have expected nothing less from Joe Biden. And I think at the end of the day, he was practical. He talked about the accomplishments that the Democrats had made, and he drew strong contrast with the Republicans. He went hard on Ukraine, which I think was important for him as a talking point. And I think that he did what he needed to do to show that he's in the game, ready to fight Donald Trump November 2024.
Yeah, and Melanie, that is so key because many going into that speech wonder if he still had the fire to campaign again and really to continue for 4 more years. Do you think that question was answered last night?
It was, and I think that shouldn't have been the question of the night. I think that it was a misstep for the Republicans to spend the past 2 months really hammering on his age and that he's frail and feeble and all of these things. And then he comes out swinging and really performed quite well last night. It was clear that he was exceptionally well prepared. He was ready for all of their heckling and had great retorts to them that made him look really sharp. Of course, there were a few missteps here and there, and there are some speech writing things that I would quibble with, like the reference to Mr. Gorbachev, take down this wall. Like the demographic of people that he needs to vote for him don't know what he's talking about when he uses that anecdote because they weren't alive then. And while he was trying to paint a picture of America kind of at this really important moment in history and with a great future ahead of them, I don't know that it necessarily resonated with that target demographic, that younger cohort that he needs to vote for him.
Gurdaton, how would you rate that performance yesterday and whether or not he actually hit the mark?
Well, we had to look at it in the context of the current political discussion around Joe Biden. And in that context, I'm giving him an A+. Biden is back, my friends. And this is something that he was able to really put to rest so many criticisms about his cognitive ability, his ability to be fiery and energetic and be able to really be the individual for the job to continue to lead the strongest nation in the world. So I think he did really, really well. And it's important that we contextualize this as well with the alternative. People need to understand that as much as you are critical of Biden, what is the alternative? Donald Trump, someone who is backing a dictator like Putin, someone who has supported insurrection in America on January 6th, someone who labor leaders has described as a scab, who's against raising minimum wages and against unions. It's so important that we understand that Biden must win to ensure we have greater global security and to ensure for us, specifically as Canadians, we have a friendly partner to the South. So I think given everything, he gets a big A+ from me.
Rachel, what did you read into his attacks on his predecessor? And he kept saying my predecessor, never said Trump by name.
To me, I was wondering, I was struck by the fact that it seemed like there were parallels to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's points of attack on Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. So we're talking about, protecting democracy, upholding women's reproductive rights, defending Ukraine, talking about upholding the social safety net, which reminded me of the Liberals' new messaging on the carbon tax, which is Pierre Poilievre will get rid of that rebate check, that benefit that you get. So that was what was interesting to me. I will reserve my judgments over the fact that delivers a speech is like now the bar for good to be president. But I think that was an interesting contrast to realize that the same issues that the Democrats in the U.S. think are going to help them beat Trump are what the Liberals here in Canada are trying to center their attacks on the Conservatives here.
Yeah, Sabrina, I wanted to ask a little bit about the GOP response. Lots of heckling in the room, even a face-off with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Is this the tone that you think we're going to see going forward?
Oh, I think it's the tone that was set, since the end of the last election. And I think that Republicans have been leaning into that for the last, 3.5 years. But I think that actually benefits Joe Biden. I think it gets the spicy, fiery response that we want to see. And I think he was responding to those heckles really well. I think he was ready for them. But I mean, in terms of the GOP response, let's talk about Katie Britt. You know, I think she's an accomplished senator, but that was perhaps a miss on the GOP response. I think it was weird putting her in the kitchen. She looked like she was playing the role of a senator more than she actually was. And I thought that the tone of that entire response was off and didn't really bring anything to the table for the Republicans going forward.
Yeah, Melanie, I mean, that GOP response is often set up, and that's the position, right? There's a bit of analysis as you see President Joe Biden shaking hands and sort of taking that victory lap around the chamber, and then they have the Republican response. Do you think that it fell flat? Because even some Republicans have been calling it a disaster.
It was rather cringeworthy, in my opinion. And now, keep in mind, a lot of that is pre-written. It's a bit canned. So they would have prepared for this in advance, like not without actually knowing what Biden was going to say in the State of the Union, making a bunch of assumptions about what would be in it, and then you do a quick edit right before you go to camera. And I just think the tone was certainly way off, especially after Biden had performed so well. They really should have instead leaned into, of course he performed well. He's had 3 weeks to prepare, and instead then instead of attacking his age, and making some of the same old trumped up, for lack of a better word, statements that they've made, focusing on what their plan is moving forward. And I think it was a missed opportunity.
Gertin, I think some people even wondered whether or not that was actually her house that she was in, because it seemed like it was staged for a catalog.
It just demonstrates in general how off the mark the GOP is outside of this echo chamber that they live within. And you have such a scary shift to the extreme right in America. The GOP is, openly supportive of insurrectionists, taking away a women's right to choose, against working class people and against the rights that they really need to thrive and survive, like unionization and fair wages. And then you have these cringeworthy pieces that are really meant just to continue to speak to that echo chamber and not to Americans as a whole. I think the GOP has just gone off a really scary direction. And I'm actually fearful when I look at the conservative movement here in Canada that the same thing is happening here, the same attacks against workers, the same playing around with opening up the doors to conspiracies, and the same language that is divisive towards those who are most marginal. So there's definitely a greater issue, I think, with conservative movements globally right now.
Rachel, last word to you on that response and whether or not it hit the mark.
Look, I can see what they were going for, wanting to present a softer, more youthful contrast to Biden. But obviously, it was an oversell, over-dramatized, and didn't seem genuine. But bigger picture, when we're talking about those key demographics that both parties need to be getting, whose clips have you seen all over social media today? It's right. Katie Britt and these jokes about, the SNL cold open, and maybe not the spicy clips of Biden heckling back. So I'll be curious to see what comes of that. I think it was, for a lot of people, an introduction to a different face to the Republican Party than having Donald Trump give the rebuttal, for example. So we'll see. I'm sure, though, conservatives in this country are looking at that as a model of what not to do when they continue to find ways to rebut the Prime Minister and the announcements he's making.
Yeah.